Before we begin, take a moment. If you find this story interesting, leave a comment with the number 1 and subscribe to support me. But if it's not quite your style, comment with the number 2 so I can improve and do better next time. Your feedback is my greatest motivation. It was an ordinary Monday afternoon when my husband James casually dropped some surprising news. He had been asked to attend a week-long business trip overseas, which meant I would be alone in the house for the first time in years. Although I knew it was part of his job, a pang of anxiety surged through me at the thought of being by myself for that long. James smiled, packed his bags, and reassured me that he would check in every night. He kissed me on the forehead and waved as he left. Once he was gone, the house felt eerily quiet, too empty. Almost like it wasn't mine anymore. I tried to fill the silence by busying myself with work, binge-watching my favorite shows, and taking long walks around the neighborhood. The first 2 days passed without much trouble, but by the third evening, something changed. I was curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to distract myself with a book, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a flicker of unease, mixed with curiosity, ran through me. When I opened the door, there stood Isaac, James's best friend. He had a bottle of wine in one hand and that familiar easy smile on his face. "Hey Emily," he said casually. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing. James mentioned his trip, and I figured you might want some company." I laughed nervously and stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do that, but it's nice to see you, Isaac." James and Isaac had been inseparable since college, their friendship built on years of shared experiences and loyalty. I had known Isaac for almost as long as I had known James, but we had never spent much time alone together. It was always the three of us or a larger group. He was a part of our lives, a constant presence, but one I had never thought much about beyond his role as James's best friend. We settled in the living room, pouring the wine as we caught up on life. We talked about work, our mutual friends, and how James was adjusting to his trip. Conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, I was laughing more than I had in days. Isaac had a way of making everything feel lighter. And that night I realized I had never truly noticed how charming and genuinely kind he could be. As the evening wore on, a subtle shift occurred between us. There was an ease in the way Isaac listened to me, his attention focused entirely on what I was saying. It felt good, refreshing even. I hadn't felt this kind of connection in a long time. At one point, I noticed his gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual. It wasn't inappropriate, but it felt different, charged with something unspoken. There was tension. And though neither of us acknowledged it, I could feel it settling in the air. I brushed off the feeling, telling myself it was just the wine, the loneliness of being away from James. Or maybe even my imagination. After all, Isaac was James's best friend, and I was James's wife. I excused myself, saying it was getting late, and Isaac smiled, thanking me for the company. As soon as the door closed behind him, a strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Something had shifted, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The next morning, I woke up feeling unsettled. The evening with Isaac played on my mind more than it should have. I told myself it was nothing, just the result of having company after a few lonely days. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. There was a strange undercurrent in our conversation that I hadn't noticed at the time but couldn't ignore. I tried to divert my attention with work, but my thoughts kept returning to Isaac and the unease I felt in his presence. By late afternoon, it became too much to bear. I picked up the phone and called my best friend Ella, the one person who would listen to me without passing judgment. "Isaac came by last night," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "James's friend." "What for?" Ella asked, her voice immediately curious. "Just to check in, I guess. We had some wine and talked." It was nice, I hesitated. Not sure how to put my feelings into words. But what? She pressed. I sighed. There was this moment, I can't really explain. It wasn't anything, but it felt like something. Ella was silent for a moment. And what did he do exactly? Nothing, I quickly replied. That's the thing. It wasn't anything specific. It was more like a feeling. Like we both knew something we weren't supposed to. Maybe it was just the wine talking. Ella offered, it sounds like overthinking it. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't convinced. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to put the conversation out of my mind, but Isaac seemed to occupy every corner of my thoughts. It was absurd, really. He was just being a good friend. I told myself. There was no need to blow things out of proportion. Later that evening, as I sat down for dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Isaac. Had a great time last night. Hope I didn't stay too long. I stared at the message, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I typed out a few different replies before settling on something simple, not at all. It was nice to have company. A few minutes later, another message came in, glad to hear that. I was thinking of stopping by again tomorrow if you're free. No pressure, of course. I hesitated. Feeling a mix of anticipation and guilt swirling inside. A portion of me wished to decline, to evade the unfolding situation. Yet another part, the one that had experienced loneliness and disconnection for several days, was enticed by the possibility that nothing would transpire. I persuaded myself that it was merely a cordial visit. Certainly, tomorrow is suitable, I responded before I could engage in excessive contemplation. The following day was characterized by a haze of anxious energy. I contemplated Isaac's visit with a blend of anticipation and trepidation. Was I bracing myself for an uncontrollable situation? Or was it just a dream? When Isaac arrived that evening, he brought takeout, and we sat at the kitchen table sharing a meal, as we had numerous times before. However, this time, the tension between us was palpable. Every laugh and glance felt electrified, as if we both recognized the unspoken bond, yet were too apprehensive to confront it. As the evening progressed, I found myself irresistibly drawn to Isaac, eliciting feelings of both exhilaration and fear. There existed a familiarity between us that was simultaneously comforting and perilous. I couldn't help but wonder how our circumstances might change if we had no ties to others. I impulsively exclaimed, Isaac, do you ever contemplate the implications of our independence from others? He regarded me with surprise, yet not astonishment. He paused for an extended duration before responding, his voice subdued yet resolute. I had contemplated it excessively. My pulse raced in my chest. I had not anticipated that reaction, and the gravity of the matter struck me forcefully. I apologized for my stammering as a surge of remorse enveloped me. I regret stating that. Isaac shook his head, indicating disapproval. Do not apologize. I experienced it as well, but I wish to avoid complicating matters between you and James. That is sacred. His words lingered, laden with the gravity of our shared emotions. I nodded, sensing the weight of the moment enveloping me. Yes, I said. I love James. I acknowledge Isaac's sentiments, which I respect. However, it is challenging to be in your presence at times. For an extended moment, we remained silent, both contemplating the gravity of our situation. We had recognized a truth that neither of us wished to confront it, and now there was no turning back. The line between friendship and something more profound had blurred, and we were on the verge of crossing it. Upon crossing it, Isaac abruptly stood, raking a hand through his hair. I should leave before we make a final decision. I nodded silently and observed him exit through the door. The house appeared even more desolate than before, and the day after Isaac's second visit was filled with a tumultuous array of emotions. I awoke experiencing an unusual blend of relief and apprehension. I was relieved that we regained our composure before the situation escalated. However, I remained preoccupied with the gravity of our discussion over how near we were to jeopardizing everything. Later that morning, James called. His voice was warm and familiar, however. I could not dispel the guilt that gnawed at me. He spoke of his trip and how much he missed me, and I endeavored to respond as normally as possible, yet I felt as though I inhabited two worlds. One in which I was James's devoted wife, and another where Isaac had awakened feelings within me that I was unprepared to confront. Later that evening, I resolved to call Isaac. I needed to ascertain that our relationship remained unchanged and that we had not crossed any irrevocable boundaries. I inquired, my voice wavering, whether we were all right after the previous night. There was a pause before he replied, affirming that we were fine. Nonetheless, his tone lacked its normal buoyancy. I pressed further, expressing my desire to avoid any awkwardness between us. I exerted pressure, and Isaac exhaled audibly. It is not unusual, yet I believe we must use caution. This is perilous. I recognized his correctness. I concur. I wish to avoid causing any damage, and I do not intend to, Isaac said. It's challenging to ignore. Upon concluding the call, I experienced an unusual sensation of finality. The conclusion was correct, yet it did not evoke a sense of triumph. A transformation had occurred in our relationship, rendering a return impossible. The subsequent days unfolded in a blur of feelings I was unable to fully comprehend. I immersed myself in work, attempting to disregard the tension between Isaac and me. Although it persisted in the recesses of my mind. James was due back in a few days, and I was determined to move on before his return. However, the day before James's return, I received a text from Isaac asking, "Can we talk?" My heart plummeted. I was aware that I ought not to reply, yet a portion of me found it irresistible. There remained matters unarticulated and unsettled. Indeed, I responded, my stomach roiling with apprehension. Isaac visited that evening. We occupied the couch, deliberately assuring eye contact. The burden of our previous discussion lingered between us. "I apologize," Isaac finally interrupted the silence. "I ought to have messaged you. I've been grappling with numerous challenges and was uncertain about how to proceed." I dismissed it with a shake of my head. "It is not your responsibility." We both allowed this situation to escalate. Isaac acquiesced. "I understand, but the problem lies in my inability to stop thinking about you. I wish to avoid this feeling, however, I cannot." I swallowed with difficulty, sensing my emotions welling up. "This is impossible, Isaac. It is unjust to both James and us." "You are correct," he spoke softly. "However, it does not alleviate the difficulty." For an instant, neither of us uttered a word. The attraction between us is unmistakable. I understood that crossing the threshold would preclude any possibility of return. The allure was present, yet I could not succumb. "I am unable to," I murmured. "I cherish James. And I cannot cause him harm." Isaac rose, his demeanor grave yet acquiescent. "I acknowledge and respect that." He halted at the door, glancing back at me one final time. "I value your well-being. But I refuse to jeopardize your marriage." With that, he departed. Upon James's return home the following day, I embraced him fervently, attempting to reassure myself that all was well. However, I was acutely aware that a part of me had irrevocably changed, and despite my efforts, I could not obliterate the memory of what had nearly transpired. Isaac and I never broached the subject again. We receded into the periphery of one another's lives, yet the unarticulated bond we had forged left an indelible impression that neither of us would ever forget. As the door closed behind Isaac, I felt burdened with sorrow, aware that we had approached a perilous threshold. I chose my marriage, however, it did not seem like a total triumph. The feelings evoked within me left an indelible impression that would require time to diminish. Occasionally, the boundaries we see as rigid may yield to the burden of unexpressed emotions. Nonetheless, remaining within those limits is sufficient to preserve the trust and affection foundational to a partnership. What actions would you have taken in my position? Would you take a risk? Indicate in the comments below if you would cross that boundary or maintain your pledge. I would appreciate your insights on this intricate subject. And please remember to subscribe for other narratives of this nature.